What are we going to look for, or what are the things that are important when we're considering where to set anterior teeth? They are the distance from the incisive papillae, the midline, the overbite or overjet, the arch form. We'll also be looking at the correct mesial-distal and labiolingual inclination of the tooth when we set it. The incisal guide pin and the incisal guide table must contact when we're setting teeth. And we will be looking for kissing contacts when the teeth are placed in protrusion. Also, the symmetry of the arch. Positioning of the 6 maxillary and mandibular teeth are very important for aesthetics, phonetics, and function of the complete denture-wearing patient. Here are some examples of denture teeth and how they come packaged from the manufacturer. Specific molds of anterior denture teeth are identified by using a first mold number and secondly a shade for that mold number. A study has shown that on an average, the labial surface of the maxillary incisors is 8 to 10 millimeters anterior to the middle of the incisive papilla. You must keep this in mind when setting the anterior teeth. In arranging the anterior teeth, as you set each tooth, you must note the mesial-distal inclination relative to a vertical drawn to the plane of occlusion. You must note the placement of the incisal edge on the plane of occlusion also. The central incisor is placed with a slight mesial inclination of the crown. If you think about the projection of the root from the crown, then you would say that the tooth has a slightly distal inclination through the root. The maxillary lateral incisor has a slightly greater mesial inclination of the crown than the central incisor, and the incisal edge is placed about a millimeter above the plane of occlusion, shown by that dotted line. The canine reverts back to a slight mesial inclination of the crown, similar to that of the central incisor. The incisal edge may be placed at the same level as the lateral incisor if you wish to create a more curved smile line, or it may be placed on the plane at the same height as the central. I kind of like this choice for our flat plane setup. It depends on the smile line of the patient, though. You would want to parallel that lower lip. The mandibular incisors differ in the inclination than the mandibular maxillary incisors. The central incisor has a very slight mesial inclination of the crown to the mesial. The lateral incisor has a slightly greater mesial inclination of the crown, and the canine has a slightly greater mesial inclination than the central incisor. All of these teeth have an incisal edge that is placed on the plane. Some individuals like to rotate the teeth slightly to give a very natural appearance. Here's a photo of the anterior setup of the maxillary teeth alone on that top picture. It shows the orientation of each tooth with the amount of mesial inclination assigned to that tooth and its position on the occlusal plane. It is noted that the central incisor has a slight mesial inclination, the lateral incisor has the greatest mesial inclination of the 6 anterior teeth, and the canine reverts back to a slight mesial inclination like the central. Note that in the top picture, the canine is set, in this particular setup, on the occlusal plane. The lateral incisor is the only one raised off the plane, and that being by about 1 millimeter. The mandibular incisors show the central incisors have a slight mesial inclination of the crown. The laterals have a slightly greater mesial inclination, and the canines have the greatest mesial inclination. Note how this differs from the maxillary arch because you might be tested on that. At the same time that we're arranging the anterior teeth and giving consideration to the inclination of the teeth in a mesial-distal direction, we must also consider the labiolingual inclination compared to the vertical. The central incisor has a slight labial inclination to the vertical. When placed correctly, the tooth has a middle prominence when you view it from the side. The lateral incisor has the greatest labial inclination of the 6 teeth. When viewed from the side, it is prominent in the incisal 1/3. The canine goes in the opposite direction. It's pushed in at the incisal, with the incisal lingual to the vertical. It is placed in lingual version to the extent that it exhibits cervical prominence.